E na mana ina reo e roranga te rama, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Nicholson toko ingoa, te tumu whakarai tōpua te whare wananga o tākou. Nō reina, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, my name's Helen Nicholson and I'm the Acting Vice-Chancellor at the University of Otago, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the University to this professorial lecture to mark Professor Stuart Brock joining us as Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Stuart's friends and colleagues and students who are with us in person and online. I'd like to give a special welcome to Stuart's partner Mariko, who's with us in person this evening, and to his father John, son Julian, and brothers Anthony and Greg, who are watching on live stream. It's lovely to have you all with us. So IPLs are a real treat for me, anyway, and I hope for the rest of you. They give us an opportunity to learn about our talented academics and to showcase the excellent research that occurs across the university, and for some of us to embrace understanding of disciplines that differ from our own. In a moment, Professor Webber is going to provide a formal introduction to Stuart, but first I just wanted to say a few words. First, because in Stuart's case, he was a professor before he came to Otago, so while this is his first public lecture, this is not technically his inaugural professorial lecture, although Stuart's just confided in me that he managed to escape his IPL at Vic, so it's probably appropriate. I first met Stuart at the University of New Zealand meetings of the DVCAs from the 8 universities when I was the DVCA, and Stuart was and is highly thought of in that group. He has a reputation for being a thoughtful, collegial person, understanding the academic landscape and for getting things done. His experience as Vice Provost and DVCA and a member of the senior leadership team at Victoria have enabled him to come in and hit the road running. His wealth of experience and his ability to bring fresh eyes are already proving beneficial to Otago. So Stuart, we're delighted that you decided to join us here. I'm very much looking forward to your lecture, and I'd now like to invite Professor Zach Webber, Head of the Philosophy Programme, to provide a formal introduction to you.
Thank you, Helen. Kia ora koutou. Associate Professor Zach Webber. Can everybody hear me? I'm the head of the philosophy program here at Otago, and it's my absolute pleasure tonight to be here to help welcome Professor Stuart Brock to Otago. Along with recognizing his new role here as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, I'm here to introduce Stuart as a philosopher, which is his academic home and background, and I'm especially here to say on behalf of the philosophy program at Otago that we're simply thrilled to welcome him here to be part of our community. It's great. Stuart has a long and distinguished research record. His interests are in the area of metaphysics, philosophy of language, philosophy of literature, and the philosophy of emotions. A lot of his work, as you'll hear tonight, centers around the ideas raised by fiction. His first article, in fact, was titled Modal Fictionalism. What's interesting about that is that it was written when he was still an undergraduate student, doing a BA at Monash, and published in the journal Mind, which is probably the most prestigious journal you could publish in as an undergraduate. So no small thing there. Well done. Since then, Stuart did his master's degree at the Australian National University in Canberra and did a PhD at Princeton. He taught at Western Washington University before coming to the University of Victoria, Wellington, where he's held various senior roles, as Helen just mentioned. Amongst all that impressive leadership work he did, he has continued to teach philosophy, teaching things like critical thinking, epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of literature, and has published a lot of important work on fiction and metaphysics. So he's published lots of articles and chapters in reference works, including in places like Philosophical Studies, Philosophical Quarterly, the Journal of Philosophy, and Noose, and the Philosophical Review, which for those of you who are in the know realize that I just rattled off basically the top 5 journals in the area. So that's pretty good too. He also has several books, most recently a new collection on moral and religious fictionalism with Oxford University Press. If you want to have a look at it, we've got a copy in the reception at philosophy. You can come over and ask Karen to show it to you. So it's a pleasure to have him here participating in the life of the university and the life of our program. So I'll just say one or two words about the thread through his research, which is fictionalism, which he'll tell you more about fiction. But what is that? Philosophers have traditionally really been into truth. And so traditionally, going all the way back to Plato, there's a lot of skepticism about fiction, which pretty much by definition is not true. So how, philosophers wonder, could we ever gain knowledge by just imagining things to ourselves, especially things that we know aren't so? Isn't fiction the opposite of truth? So the answer that you could give is that fiction can still be deeply valuable, and we can learn profound things from it, and even find it useful, even if it is fiction. It's the idea that some things can be good without being true. And if philosophy is about helping us make sense of our lives, maybe sometimes the thing to do is to look at a dry ethical treatise, but sometimes the thing to do is to dip into a good piece of literature and then come back to real life having learned something from the experience. So, as Iris Murdoch once put it, man is a creature who makes pictures of himself and then comes to resemble the picture. And I like that very much. This semester, we're very happy that Stuart is teaching religious fictionalism in the philosophy program alongside Heather Dyke and me in a new honors course that we've got. And I think this bodes very, very well, not just because our students, I think some of whom are here. Well, they said they would be here. Oh. I'm going to talk to them. Okay. Not just because our students will benefit from his expertise, but by doing this teaching for us, I think it really shows what kind of leader Stuart has come here to be. Teaching is not a requirement of the DVCA role, but when he arrived here, he said to me that he just couldn't imagine leading and overseeing teaching at Otago without doing some teaching at Otago, and that's music to my ears. That's what you want leaders to be, if only more generals would do that. So that's, in a word, marvelous. He's offered to teach about modal metaphysics and the philosophy of language, and he has ideas about other classes too, like ones where we get undergraduates to try to publish in prestigious journals. And now I know where he got the idea. So thinking about fiction is to ask questions about ourselves and our imaginations. As we'll hear tonight, we are in very good hands. So welcome and congratulations, Stuart.
Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana ki anai tahu te iwi mana whanua o konei. No ahi te reria o. Ko Wurundjeri Woiwurrong te iwi mana whanua o Kora. I tipu ake o I raro I ngā pai mauna o Dandenong. Ko yara te awa I whanaihia o. Ko te pōkoko matoraka o. Ko Stuart Brock, toko ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I want to start this evening by thanking many of you here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, and I assume most, if not all of you do, my name's Stuart Brock. I am the DVC academic. I am first and foremost a philosopher. It's an absolute honour to be here tonight. I'm very grateful to have the privilege to give this lecture to you all tonight, but I feel it's somewhat self-indulgent. So I do thank you for sitting through this hour or so of self-indulgence on my part. I want to structure the lecture as follows. I want to start by telling you a bit about myself, giving you a bit of personal history. Then I want to tell you a little bit about my research, and some of it is very arcane and esoteric. I've tried to avoid talking about that and try and focus on part of my research that I think might interest some of you. And then I want to finish by talking to you a little bit about what my approach as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic will be at Otago University, and I'm going to try and link some of what I say in my discussion about my research to how I think about what I do in my role as DVCA. I will warn you from the beginning, it's a little bit of a long bow I hope to draw here, but I hope you'll excuse me tonight. Let me start though by thanking those of you, those family in Australia, my son Julian, my brothers, Ant and Greg, who are watching via the live stream. I'd like to thank my in-laws in Japan, Shitaka-san, Midori-san, and Kanako-san. I'd like to also thank my family and friends in New Zealand who couldn't make it here tonight, who are watching by live stream, especially Emma and Louis. I'd also like to thank everybody, without exception, at the University of Otago for welcoming me here tonight and for welcoming me here in an absolutely fulsome way to take on the role as DVCA. I'd like to especially thank my SLT colleagues. I'd like to especially thank all of the staff, the professional staff who work for me. They do an outstanding job. I'd like to thank the academic staff who do all of the core work of the university. You do an amazing job. And I'd like to thank the philosophy program for welcoming me. And you really have welcomed me, inviting me to take part in the life of the department. I've been to the pub many evenings with you all and have appreciated those opportunities. I'd like to also thank all of those who emailed me before my talk this evening. I did invite people to do that. I especially invited them to give me advice on how I should think about the new role as DVCA. That was what I was really hoping for, and I want to reflect some of that advice back to you tonight. But what I was blown away by was that a lot of people did that, but a lot of people also took the time to write to me about the content of the philosophy I'm going to talk about tonight. And the people who did that were often people working outside of the discipline. So I really thank you for that early engagement in what I'm going to talk about tonight. I do have two special thanks tonight though, before I start. The first one is to my partner Mariko. I am so grateful to you for everything you've done for me, all the support you give me. I couldn't be here without you. I couldn't have taken on the role without you. I want to thank you also for making sure you could be here this evening. It really means the world to me. So thank you so much, sweetheart. The most special thanks I want to give tonight, though, is to my father, John. Dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer about 2 years ago. He was not given much time to live. He was told not to plan for his 80th birthday, which was just a few months away. Dad, I want to thank you for sticking around a little bit longer. I really appreciate that. I also want to thank you for all the support you've given me over the years. And when I reflect on it, he gave me a lot of love, skills, knowledge that really brought me to where I am today, or was really important to it. But when I reflect back on the kind of support that my father has given me, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, he has read more of my work than anyone else in the world. So, Dad, thank you for engaging with that, and thank you for being here tonight, at least online. Let me start by the talk this evening by giving you just a little bit of an understanding of where my personal journey began. I won't go back, sometimes people go back a long way in history. Don't plan to do that tonight. I want to start with my mother and father. Mum and Dad met in 1958. Mum went to Furbank Girls' School. Dad went to Brighton Grammar School. They both lived in Brighton, which is a suburb in Melbourne. By 1960, they were, in Dad's words, going steady with one another. By 1967, they were married. By the way, apologies for these sort of blurry photos, but I do want to have another shout out at this point to Russell Buxton, who used a little bit of AI to improve the photos on here tonight. So thanks, Russell. So in 1968, I was born. You can probably tell from these photos, my parents were really came into themselves in the 60s. In 1969, they moved into what became our family home in 61 Catherine Avenue, Mount Waverley. Mount Waverley, by the way, was a suburb just adjacent to Clayton, which is where the main campus of Monash University is. We lived in that family home all of our childhood. In 1970, my first brother, Ant, was born. And exactly 8 years after I was born to the day, in 1976, my third brother, Greg, was born, and there we all are in, I guess, the late 1970s with Mum, looking very serious. I guess the 1970s were a serious time. Mum and Dad had a huge influence on my life in two related ways. It was my parents valued very deeply education, and in particular tertiary education. And it was that value that was inculcated or just ingrained into us from a very early age that really did mean that I did feel like it was not really an option that I not come to university. But the other value that both Mum and Dad really fostered in us was the value of the creative arts, and Dad in particular, the value of literature. And it's because of him I have a love of literature, and it really is a deep love, but it was one that came to me late in life. As a high school student, I really didn't enjoy reading, but I guess towards the very end I started to, and now I can't resist it. I just want to tell you a little bit about the value of education that came from my parents. If I can. There we go. Mum, let me start with Mum. Mum really wanted to go to university. That was she had a very strong desire to go. That desire, unfortunately, was thwarted through no fault of her own. Mum, when she was at high school, got nothing but A+ for every single class she took, much to the chagrin of her younger brother, who really couldn't understand why she enjoyed school so much. She wanted to go to university and made no bones about it. She didn't hide it. But in 1960, when she was looking to go, less than 20% of the places at tertiary education were occupied by women. It's very different today. And not only was the proportion so much lower, the absolute number of people going to university at the time was so much lower as well. There were at the time fewer than 9,000 females at doing a bachelor's degree across the whole of Australia. So it wasn't something women were expected to do back then. They were expected, I guess, to be housewives. In that context, Mum's dad took her out of Burbank, her high school, the year before her final year, so she had no opportunity to be admitted to university. Nonetheless, it didn't stop her pursuing tertiary education. So once she finished school, she could enrol at Toorak Teachers College, and that's what you see up there, and that's exactly what she did. Now, that was in 1960, and that was no small feat back then. It might seem like a straightforward thing, but it was only in 1956, a few years before, that women who were married were allowed to be teachers. So if you were a teacher before 1956 in Australia, the moment you got married, you had to resign any permanent position at school. It's hard to believe now. And at that time, there was also something known as the marriage bar in the public service. And the marriage bar basically said the same thing if you had a role in the public service. If you had such a role, you had to resign if you got married. That was abolished a year or so later. But you can see it was not an easy time to get a role in the public service or as a teacher back then. Dad had it a little easier. Dad enrolled at Melbourne University in 1961 in a Bachelor of Arts, and he completed a Bachelor of Arts with honours, majoring in English literature and minoring in pure mathematics, graduating in 1965. Dad enjoyed his time at university very much. He enjoyed it so much, he went back in 1965 to Melbourne University again, and got in 1969, and enrolled in a graduate diploma in teaching and graduated in 1970. But he didn't stop there. In 1978, he went back to Melbourne University again and enrolled in what we would call a Certificate of Proficiency, to do a course in probability and also to do another course in statistical inference. Later again, he decided to enrol in a course at Monash University on computer programming. These days, we might think about micro-credentials for continuing education, and Dad, you have inspired me to think about opportunities there might be in that space. Dad's first year at university, and thank you for bearing with me on this, was transformative for him. He writes in his diary that in many ways, and I'm quoting from Dad's diary, in many ways the best part of 1960 was taking English, I just realised Dad enrolled at university in 1960, not 61. The best part of 1960 was taking English Lit as a subject. Not only was Thomas Hardy on the course, including Far From the Madding Crowd, which I read at least 3 times, as well as several of his other novels, but so was King Lear, which has ever since been my favourite Shakespeare play. We were lucky to see a professional production of it early in the year. Other highlights included Chaucer, the poetry of Shelley and others, and I think more sure. So I guess what I'm trying to pass on to you at the moment is how much my dad enjoyed literature. In 1965, Mum had completed her diploma of education. She had a job, and she went on a gap year. She decided to go to Europe with a number of her friends. Dad was miserable. He didn't enjoy that year at all. He didn't enjoy it because he missed Mum, but he wasn't really enjoying other things about university life at that stage. But he did really enjoy his honours thesis, so he decided to immerse himself in that. And Dad decided to write a thesis on Thomas Hardy's, what he called, I think, was it an epic play or called The Dynasts. It was written as a play, but for very obvious reasons, it has never been performed. It was written in 3 volumes. It had 19 acts. It had 130 scenes. And when I looked it up on Amazon today, it has 550 pages with reasonably small print. It was hard for me to find a reader review online. There was one positive review I found from someone who'd bought it as a gift for someone else and said it came with a low price and it was a big book. Dad's thesis was that the main protagonist in the Dynasts, that's Napoleon Bonaparte, was a tragic hero. And that claim was vigorously denied by Hardy himself, but Dad put a lot of, devoted a thesis to explaining why he thought Hardy was wrong, despite the fact that he was the author of the play. And no one was going to dispute Dad because Hardy wasn't alive anymore and no one else had read the play. So Dad, I just want to say too, thank you for that, because you have ingrained in me a passion for Thomas Hardy. I haven't read, and I know I never will, the Dynasts, but I have an enormous joy reading Thomas Hardy's other shorter novels. Mum and Dad's passion for tertiary education, I hope, is obvious, and Dad's passion for literature is a love shared by me. Dad's joy was much about, it was not just about Dad's joy for university life, though, was not just about the academic study. It was about the experience, the student experience of being at Melbourne University. This is a picture of Ormond College in the 1960s. Ormond College was where Dad resided in the final 2 years of his Bachelor of Arts degree at Melbourne, and he enjoyed the experience immensely. He got to stay with some friends he already knew well. He made other friends. He enjoyed the experience of, as we all know, all students do, of that experience of having an independent life for the first time. Dad also met some fascinating people at Ormond College, and one of those acquaintances, probably not a friend, but an acquaintance, was Peter Singer. I'm not sure if how many of you know Peter Singer, but he's probably Australia's most famous living philosopher. He's an ethicist, and I've had intersections with Peter's life as well since. I do recall vividly a conversation or two with my mum about Peter when I was growing up, and I do remember vividly her calling him a rat bag. So there was something that got under her skin. I have never quite got to the bottom of whether it was just his ethical views that she had a problem with. I guess I'll never know. Fast forward a few decades. I'm nearing the end of my time at school. I went to Campbell Grammar School. That was a school at which my father was a teacher. Dad was because Dad was a teacher there, I got the opportunity to enrol there, I think for free, whereas others had to pay. It was an elite private school, so others would have had to pay an enormous amount to enrol there. I was enormously lucky and privileged to be able to go to Camberwell. The resources there for students were mind-blowing when I think back on it. I didn't really appreciate that at the time. I didn't enjoy my time at Camberwell much at all. I was a very average student, and I was an average student because I checked out. I checked out because I didn't enjoy my time there. When I think back on the reasons why I didn't enjoy my time there, three come to mind. There may be more. One was people didn't really like the fact that I was the son of a school teacher there, so I was bullied a little bit. On top of that, I did start school too young, and my parents appreciated that. There was a choice they faced when I was very young, and they enrolled me in school at 4 years of age, and that meant I struggled a little bit as I went through, although I was stretched. But I think probably the main reason why I didn't enjoy it was I didn't really gel with the people who I had to mix with, the students there, because they were extraordinarily privileged. And with that kind of privilege, without maturity of adulthood, you can be incredibly self-entitled. And I just did not enjoy that at all. So I was not a great student. And it was not clear to I guess, my parents that I was going to go to university. But in my mind, there wasn't really an option. So I was determined to go to university. I wanted to go to the University of Melbourne, like my dad. But I just didn't get the grades to get into Melbourne. So I had to go for my second choice, which was Monash University, which was just up the road. Now, I can't tell you the absolute good fortune of a couple of things that happened at this point. So first, absolute stroke of good luck that I got to go to Monash rather than Melbourne, and I'll explain why in a minute. The other stroke of good luck was that I knew what I wanted to study. I wanted to study psychology. But you had to pick other subjects as well. And I didn't know what my fourth subject would be. And it was only at the very last minute, when I knew a couple of other friends were enrolling in philosophy, that I decided that I was going to enroll in philosophy. Well, I didn't know at the time how much I would love philosophy, and I didn't know at the time how awesome the philosophy department was at Monash University. So that's a picture of the Menzies building. That's where the philosophy department was back then. There's a list of some of the philosophers I worked closely with at Monash. The philosophers probably will appreciate the calibre of people up there, others may not. Just a whistle-top tour from there. I went to the Australian National University. I got to work with these people, again, outstanding calibre of people. You'll see some of them followed me up there. And then from there, I went to do my PhD at Princeton University. So this is a picture of 1879 Hall, where the philosophy department is located. And there is a list of the philosophers I worked quite closely with there as well. I'm going to reflect on those lists in a moment, not just to say how wonderful those philosophers are, because they really were amazing philosophers, but there's another observation I want to make. But I'll come back to that. I then had my first job at Western Washington University, and there the philosophers, that was just a small university. My God, what a beautiful part of the world that is. It's almost as beautiful as New Zealand. It was incredible. It was lovely to be there. I was at a tenure track job. I was there for 3 years before getting the job at Victoria University, Te Haranga Waka, in 2002. And there are my colleagues. I want to thank all of these philosophers, by the way, for the support and influence they've had on my life. It's been amazing. But the reflection I want to make is that I'm not sure if you noticed it, but there is an extraordinary proportion of blokes in those lists. And I didn't realise quite how significant it was until I went back and looked at that list for this lecture. And every single university, I think there were only one or two if we were lucky, women on any of the lists. And I'm glad at Otago we're at the upper end of the average on that one. But so philosophy, I have known for a long time, is a discipline that's just not doing a good job in this space. There aren't many, if any, Indigenous philosophers either. Well, I do want to tell you a little bit about what I've tried to do. I don't know how successful I've been in addressing it, just a little small steps I've tried to take in my time in New Zealand. The first thing I did when I got to New Zealand was I did apply for a teaching grant to try and look deeply at what was happening and why and where we were losing females, because in first year we had a proportion of about 50-50. I'm also very pleased to say that my research students, roughly 50% of my research students, whether they're MA or PhD that I've supervised, have been females. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is the Australasian Association of Philosophy, which is the peak body in philosophy in Australasia. It's recently celebrated its 100 years. I don't know how many Eliza knew, but I'm not sure if anyone else knew. My plan when I first got in was to change the profile of the executive and, if I could, the board. So I was the CEO for about 4 or 5 years. When I got there, there was one female, and she stepped down soon afterwards. So I was determined to make sure that profile changed. My hope was, for a little while, to have it 100% females. I never got there, but I was very happy to step down and see that profile change quite dramatically. And the reason I think that's important is I think if people can see themselves in the leadership group, it might change things elsewhere. Anyway, that's all I'll say on that one. Let me tell you now a little bit about my research. As Zach has told you, my research primarily is, and it won't be a surprise to you now, when I try and find a theme across it all, it's the role that literature can play in discovering truths about the world. And as Zach said, that would be a surprising thing, because fiction is about engaging your imagination. The purpose of fiction is to entertain us. It's not to get at the truth. You'd be foolish to think that fiction has a role in asserting things about reality. So why should I be interested in that question? Well, on my view, fiction can tell you a lot of, not just a lot of things about the world, it can tell you a lot of interesting things about the world. And I want to tell you about just one interesting thing you can learn from fiction tonight. And it's just a part of my research, but it's one I find myself coming back to often. And it's got to do with the fact about our psychology and our engagement with fiction. And it's a puzzling thing to learn about it. To illustrate the idea, I'm going to give you a selection from Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. So Jude and Sue have 3 children. They're very poor. They're struggling in Christminster. They've just gone out. They had a good time. They've come back. And this is what the passage says. Jude stood bending over the kettle with his watch in his hand, timing the eggs so that his back was turned to the little inner chamber where the children lay. A shriek from Sue suddenly caused him to start around. She saw that the door of the room, or rather the closet, which had seemed to go heavily upon its hinges as he pushed it back, was open, and that Sue had sunk to the floor just within it. Hastening forward to pick her up, he turned his eyes to the little bedspread on the boards. No children were there. He looked in bewilderment around the room. At the back of the door were fixed 2 hooks for hanging garments, and from these the forms of the 2 youngest children were suspended by a piece of box cord around each of their necks, while from a nail a few yards off the body of little Jude was hanging in a similar manner. An overturned chair was near the elder boy, and his glazed eyes were slanted into the room, but those of the girl and the baby were closed. As I'm sure you can appreciate with the longer narrative, this is quite a disturbing passage, the most disturbing passage in the novel, and the narrative changes after that point. I want you to imagine if Hardy had continued the narrative thus, and Jude, unlike Sue, did the right thing by keeping quiet, for it's a vice of the worst kind to squeal as Sue did in such circumstances. And this was all for the good, for there were too many children anyway. I hope you can appreciate that these last statements, which of course Hardy didn't add, are very, very jarring indeed, and there's something goes deeply, deeply wrong if we added, or if an author tried to add a statement like that. So part of what I want to talk about tonight is what's problematic about those sorts of statements. Let me start by saying that the problem is uniquely about the moral nature or the evaluative nature of the claims at the end. I mean, there are other problems perhaps with it, but that is one of the problems with the claims, the bold claims there. And the idea is this: when we engage with fiction, an author has the capacity to engage us in imagination on the wildest, most speculative claims possible. An author can say that their characters travel backwards in time and change the past. An author can talk about inanimate objects talking to one another, and we have no trouble engaging with those things even though they're impossible. But when an author tries to make a moral claim that jars with the morality that we believe, we resist. We don't imagine what we're invited to imagine in those cases. This puzzle has been widely discussed for centuries. In recent times, since about the 1990s, the puzzle has come to be known as the puzzle of imaginative resistance. But David Hume, over 250 years ago, long before Thomas Hardy was even born, noticed the problem. This is what he said in a passage towards the end of his famous work of The Standards of Taste, and I quote, "Whatever deviations from fact are found in fiction, they detract but little from the value of those compositions. There needs but a certain turn of thought or imagination to relish the sentiments or conclusions derived from them. But a very violent effort is requisite to change our judgment of manners and excite sentiments of approbation or blame, love or hatred, different from those for which the mind from long custom has been familiarised. And where a man is confident of the rectitude of that moral standard by which he judges, he is justly jealous of it, and will not pervert the sentiments of his heart for a moment in compliance to any writer whatsoever." End quote. Recent interest in this puzzle has revolved to quite a large extent in disentangling a myriad of puzzles that Hume conflates in that single passage. And all of them are genuine puzzles. So let me try and outline them for you very quickly. Actually, I've got the order of, I've just realised I've got the wrong set of slides here. Before I outline them for you, let me take special care to try and persuade you that there is a genuine puzzle here by pointing out that the puzzle that Hume is pointing to is not one of these puzzles, which aren't puzzles at all. So, for example, it's not the puzzle of explaining why readers can't imagine morally bad things happening as they're described in fiction. Because morally bad things happen all the time in fiction. That's not a puzzle that needs to be explained at all. If you read any novels written in the 19th century, or almost any, if you read Hardy or Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Dickens, all of these writers took great pleasure in describing how bad the human condition was. So it's not a puzzle about explaining how bad things happen. Moreover, it's not a puzzle about explaining why we can't imagine characters and narrators having deviant moral points of view. We know that happens all the time as well. We know if you read Lolita and you think about the character Humbert, you know that there are all the time characters in fiction that are amoral in their point of view. And it's also not the puzzle of explaining why readers can't desire morally bad things to happen in imagination. Okay, there are lots of occasions where you as a reader might actually enjoy the experience of wanting bad things to happen. Charles Pigden, who wrote to me on the weekend, described just such a situation. It was a situation where you think about The Sopranos, you think about the mafia moral code. You in imagination buy into that, and you want that. You want Tony, the main character, to buy into the code. That's not the puzzle we're trying to explain. The puzzle, or the puzzles we're trying to explain in Hume, require us to think about an alternative morality, because notice in all of those spurious cases, we hold morality fixed. The moral truths remain the same. We just see that morality, the world isn't always a good place, or that people sometimes do bad things, but morality stays the same. What Hume is asking us to do is to imagine an alternative morality. When we do that, something goes wrong. There are a whole lot of things that go wrong. One of the things that goes wrong is sometimes when you have a fiction that's like that, is we think there's the moral problem in the fiction is also an aesthetic flaw. So if you think about maybe Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, advocating a kind of Nazi propaganda film there, that you might think in those cases that the moral claims made in the work actually make it an aesthetically flawed in some way. And so there's a puzzle about explaining why that might be the case. There's a puzzle about explaining why we feel funny, why we have the particular feelings that we do, the repulsion that we do when authors make deviant moral claims in their works. And there's a puzzle about the author's control over their fiction and whether or not they can actually control the content of their fiction when they talk about deviant alternative moralities. None of these problems are the problems that go under the name the puzzle of imaginative resistance. The puzzle of imaginative resistance is a puzzle about explaining a failure of our imaginative engagement when it comes to an author inviting us to imagine that alternative morality holds. Okay, and it's a puzzle because there is no such barrier in our imagination when it comes to wildly implausible, perhaps impossible, descriptive claims being made in fiction. Now, that's the puzzle. How do I know? How do I know? How does Hume know? How does anyone else know that claim about morality is in fact true? Well, it's all anecdotal. It's it's based on the intuitions of philosophers, and philosophers traffic in intuitions. But one of the most remarkable things about this particular case is that there is an overwhelming consensus of philosophical opinion on this particular issue. There are scores of people who write on this problem, and almost universally, every published piece has agreed that there is a phenomenon here that needs explaining. There are a few outlier papers. I could find 3 which seem to claim that there's no problem here or that there's no asymmetry here. But in each and every one of them, if you look and you actually read the paper, they're talking about another puzzle, or they think it's not, or they just think they can explain it. That's not to say that there's not an asymmetry there. That's not to say that no one thinks that there isn't a genuine asymmetry there. I hope you don't mind me quoting you, Charles. On Sunday, he wrote the following to me. The second proposition, that's the second claim there, seems to be just about as obviously false as a statement about our responses to fiction can very well be. So I know there are at least some philosophers who disagree with the asymmetry, and Charles, there may be a paper there for you. But here are just a couple of citations to back that up. You'll see if you look at these philosophers, they say quite explicitly that it's just their intuitions that back it up. For those of you who are still not convinced, though, there's a growing literature in social psychology actually testing in various different ways that very hypothesis. And every single one of those papers listed there, in a different way, gives empirical evidence that there is an asymmetry here. So it's a genuine asymmetry to be explained. Let me finish this piece by telling you a little bit about what remains to be done. So if there's a genuine asymmetry there, we need to be able to explain why there's an asymmetry there. What gives rise to our resistance or failure to imagine deviant moral claims being true if we're invited to do so in fiction? And the literature suggests that there are three high-level kinds of explanation you might be able to offer. And I use the terminology here from Tamar Gendler, who's written some very important papers in this area, so I don't take credit for it myself. The first kind of explanation is what she calls Wondtianism, and that kind of explanation, which is one she advances, suggests that the reason readers fail to take up an author's invitation to imagine a deviant moral claim being true is because they're unwilling to do so. It's because it's something they don't want to do. And because they don't want to do it, they literally resist imagining what the author's inviting them to imagine. For various reasons, I don't buy that explanation, but I won't go into that today. The second kind of explanation, which is probably even more popular than the first, is called Kantianism. And according to that explanation, readers fail to take up the author's invitation to imagine deviant moral claims being true not because they don't want to, they might want to well enough, it's just that they find themselves unable to do so. There's something preventing them from imagining what they're invited to imagine. And it might be because there's some conceptual impossibility in the invitation as it's presented to them, and as a consequence, they can't imagine it. If you adopt that kind of explanation, though, you need to carefully explain why the conceptual impossibility here is a barrier, but it's not in the descriptive case. And the final kind of explanation, this is the one I tend to find most plausible, although I will explain that there are other options available, is a position called Hardianism. That's my terminology. And that's the kind of explanation that readers fail to take up an author's invitation to imagine deviant moral claims being true, not because they don't want to, they might want to well enough, and it's not because they can't. They may be able to if they try hard enough, or if the author helps them with their narrative in a fulsome enough way, but it's difficult to do so. There are certain barriers there to imagination that need to be overcome. Now, obviously, no matter which kind of explanation you adopt, you're going to have to go into more details, and there are lots of different ways you can do that. I want to finish this part of the talk by saying that one of the things I try and do in a number of papers I've written in this literature is to say that's not the only possible kind of solution you can adopt, because all of the solutions just outlined make two presuppositions. The first one is that any statement within a fiction is an invitation by an author of the fiction to imagine the content of what's said. And the second is that the reader recognises this intention on the part of the author. And I look at, in my work on the topic, I look at a lot of different ways you might deny one of those two assumptions and find plausible ways, in my view, and find alternative solutions to the puzzle. But I won't have time to go through those tonight. Let me finish by giving very briefly, and I'm recognising I'm out of time, so I'll be very quick, some comments on my vision for learning and teaching. So the first thing I want to note, before I give you my reflections, is that there are a lot of really good things about learning and teaching at Otago, but also a lot of really good things about the student experience at Otago. And having a good student experience for a whole lot of reasons is good for your education. This is a photo of the toga party earlier this year. A couple of observations I want to make. First observation, we don't want to think only about learning and teaching, which we do want to think about. We do need to think very carefully about the student experience, because that's part of the reason that students come and enrol at Otago. But the other thing we have to think about is how to do that well. And so that's something we really need to think hard about going forward, and I could talk about that for a whole hour, but know that we need a nuanced view around that. The second thing I want to note, and we don't need, well actually we do need a little bit of a nuanced view around this. We do extraordinarily well at Otago, and I don't want us to lose sight of this, on all of the equity measures that TEC or we should care about in terms of Māori success rates, in terms of Pacifica success rates, in terms of student success, in terms of other equity group successes. We on every single measure shoot above the average. We are either first or second. And I think we need to, for whatever reason we do that, we need to congratulate ourselves for that. But I think we do also have an opportunity to enhance what we do really well. So that's something I'll be looking at as well. I want to reflect back to you the themes I've got in my first 90 days at the university. So I've got feedback from students. They've been very clear that they have 3 priorities and they're going to push hard this year. One is around class reps and teaching evaluations. They want to make sure that our class reps have a role in putting some of those questions in the teaching evaluation forms. So we've already started looking at how that can be done in a positive and good way. They want clear communication about courses and program offerings in future years, because they're worried about the management of change processes that have happened, and now they feel confused about, we've got so many courses on the books, why are we offering so few? How can I make predictions about what I should enrol in future years? I think it's a really good idea for us to be clear in our communications as far as we can, so I'm working with them on that. The third thing they have been pushing me on very hard is advocacy for universal access to lecture recordings and closed captioning. So I will be thinking about that this year. So that's just a heads up. I won't go into the staff advice in detail today, but here are 9 themes that have come through the advice that's come to me. And I should tell you, I've continued to get advice. I got the last email about an hour before I came here. These are all good suggestions. These are all good ideas, and many of them were made by more than one staff member. I want you to know one of the most gratifying things from my perspective is that as I start looking into these, I think I can help possibly with every one of them. And I should say when I say I can help, often what I do is just ping some of these off to other members of staff and say, can you help? And they come back and they're great. They say, yes, I can. So I don't know, is Joe here tonight? Is Joe, I do want to thank you for helping with some of these. So thank you very much. I do have to think about the Otago Teaching and Learning Plan. It will be part of the domain plan for Paitata. But I do also want to say, and this is my last slide, when I think about it, and this is the long bow I was hoping to draw, when I think about my talk, what can I learn from my talk that will help me develop that plan? Well, I want to say first that there's a link here to our imagination, because I think in order to lift ourselves up and develop a learning and teaching plan or strategy, we need to think beyond just the small things. We need to have a big picture and have blue skies thinking and capture the imagination of staff, professional staff, academic staff and students as we do that. So we've got to engage with our imagination. My responsibility will be to make clear that I'm actually inviting staff to contribute to that implementation. It's not just a top-down approach. I don't think it will work well if it's just managed in a small back room by me and a couple of others. It has to be something that engages all staff across the university. I need to go from won'tianism to want-toism. I need to get people to want to do this, and that requires me to engage with the goals and aspirations and values of our staff. I might not be able to engage with everybody's goals and values and motivations because we have such a disparate, and that's one of the most wonderful things about a university. It's very hard to get a consensus on anything, but I do need to make sure that I talk to you all and I need to be able to carry as many of you with me as I can. And the final thing I want to say, I want to move from Kantianism to can-doism. And by that what I mean is, I think what we need to do is primarily focus on the aspirations, the goals, the outcomes that we want, rather than focusing on the barriers and on the reasons why we can't do any of these things. Because I think that gets the order wrong. If you focus first on those things and just give up, you're not going to get anywhere. What I think you really need to do is work out where you really want to get to and then focus on taking away the barriers as we can. So that's not, it doesn't give you much of a list on what I'm planning to do. It just tells you a little bit about my approach. But I've only had a little over 90 days here, so now's my time to start thinking about it. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Stuart, for your excellent lecture. I think you have challenged us and made us all think in one way or another, so thank you. It was lovely to hear about your personal journey, and it really brings back that our family history and family values play such an important part in who we are. And I think for you, hearing about the value that your parents set on education and literature has really made a difference. And I guess it makes us all think, especially those of us who are parents, as to how we have or can influence our offspring, hopefully for the better. And for me, talking about Hardy, I grew up not far from where Hardy lived, so it was lovely to hear about Thomas Hardy. I'm reflecting that as part of the interview process for our DVCs, we don't often spend a lot of time talking about their research, although we expect them to be research active. So it's interesting to hear your research, and perhaps we should get all new people to give lectures as well. I think your discussion of puzzles and imaginative resistance was fascinating and provides much food for thought, and I'm going to be really challenged, I think, next time I sit down and read a good book. So I think, thank you. And your link to imagining how things could be different in a practical way for the university, I think was a long bow, but thank you. And the importance of both student experience as well as learning and teaching is what you said. Thank you for asking students and staff what their priorities are, because I think it's an important thing that we actually engage. And engagement is really key if we want to make a difference in the future. So thank you very much, and I have a small gift to give you.